Hello, my name is Dr. Keith Martin. I'm the Executive Director of the Consortium of Universities for Global Health here in Washington, D.C., and welcome to today's webinar on Healthy Planet, Healthy People, the Planetary Health Global Health Opportunity. And it's fitting that I'm speaking today at the first week of your program on global health challenges because a lot of things are happening in the world. Right now in San Francisco, the world is coming together to deal with climate change, one of the big threats to our planet, and I was fortunate yesterday to be there. So what I'm going to do is, in the midst of this particular webinar, I will integrate and share some of the things I saw at that particular meeting. I'd like to thank Dr. Elizabeth Grant for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today on this particular webinar. But first, let me talk a little bit about myself and about how I got involved in this. I'm the Executive Director, as I said, of CUGH. I'm a physician by training. And I got involved in this because working in Africa, I had a chance to see the importance of the environment and health and the interface between both of those. And what I saw was that the environment, of course, provided vital and life-saving assets to people in terms of food, in terms of medicines, jobs, and intact ecosystems was vitally important to people's health. When ecosystems were dismantled or threatened, it has a huge impact, as we know, on people's health in a broad range of areas, and importantly, really undermines the social determinants of health. I also saw, because after becoming a physician, I went in and became a member of the Canadian Parliament for almost 18 years. And I got involved in that because I saw that governments around the world were neglecting the environment and more broadly planetary health, One Health. And what we know from many governments, at least up until very recently, is that governments have really not paid attention to the environment. They have not paid attention to climate change. And as a result of that, our planet is under significant threat. And because our planet is under threat, so too are we. So what I'm going to do in this particular webinar is we're going to walk through some of the big challenges our planet faces. But it's not all bad news. There's great news. Great news because there are a lot of solutions that can be implemented right now, today, to be able to address those challenges. And these solutions we must address. So let's start the webinar, and let's talk about the big challenge. Right now on our planet, we have about 7.2 billion people. We predict in the future, by 2050, we're going to have about 9.2 billion people. But where are we today? If you know what August the 12th was this year, August the 12th was Earth Overshoot Day. What that means is that we are using the ecosystem services, those renewable assets that our planet provides for our health, food, water, clean air. We use an entire year's, the whole year's assets that our planet can provide for our current population, and we use it by August the 12th of this year, which means that from August the 12th, 2018 to December the 31st, we are using more than what our planet can produce. Now, this isn't going in the right direction by any stretch of the imagination. As time has passed, that day, that Earth Overshoot Day, that day when we're using more than our planet can actually produce, is becoming an earlier and earlier day on the calendar. So as time passes, we're actually moving that day earlier and using far more than our planet can produce. So the big challenge we face today is how can we live on this planet in a sustainable way? Now, there's many threats to that. Climate change, we've heard before, the degradation of ecosystems affecting our food, air, water, the essentials of life, jobs, and the implications of this are quite considerable. So this 99.2 billion person challenge, how can we actually live on a sustainable planet to be able to provide for the population that we have today, but importantly, looking in the future, what that means for providing for a population that's expected to be 9.2 billion by the year 2050. So what are some of those threats? When I said that this week we have the San Francisco Climate Change Conference, at the same time, I'm sitting here in Washington, D.C., just 300 kilometers south of where we are. one of the biggest hurricanes of all time is actually smashing up against the eastern seaboard of the United States. Now, this is not unusual. All around the world, we are seeing extreme weather events. Now, make no mistake, these extreme weather events are a direct consequence of climate change and the effect that that has on the environment and the intricate web of life and the ecosystems that actually merge together to deal with everything from how the ocean currents function, how the water patterns, the weather patterns, temperature patterns, all of those are deeply affected by climate change. And climate change, as we know, is affected by the production of carbon dioxide that is produced, the excess carbon dioxide produced by us as human beings, in this what we call the Anthropocene. What was happening in San Francisco this week is that the world got together to say, A, climate change is an existential threat to our survival, and B, what can we do to be able to address this? Now, many countries, of course, around the world, we know governments have embraced this, and they recognize that this is a problem, which is the first challenge. And secondly, they're trying to implement some solutions, albeit not as fast as we would like. But some governments are not doing that. And this is a very big challenge and a big threat that's going to require our collective action to address. So you see on the top corner, you see the hurricane coming into to the eastern seaboard of the United States. You also see on the bottom of that picture, that's a picture of the polar ice cap in the Arctic. In September 1984, that ice cap, as you can see very clearly, was much larger than what it is today. It has shrunk considerably. Now, this has huge implications for the entire planet, and in particular, of course, for the people, the Inuit and others who live in the northern regions of our planet. It has a huge impact upon them, and of course, on all the other creatures that live there. It may seem, people would ask, well, who cares what happens to the polar ice caps, both in the Arctic and in the Antarctic? Well, that has huge implications for the levels of water as they rise, which has huge implications also on the melting ice. It's having huge implications on weather patterns too. The other thing we don't speak about is that the Arctic ice cap is melting, but so too is the tundra. Now, I'll tell you why this is interesting, because it's neglected. In the tundra, there are vast deposits of methane. Methane has a power to warm the planet, a global greenhouse gas that is 24 times more powerful than carbon dioxide. Now, that methane is sequestered, it's held in the tundra in the northern regions of our planet. As the temperature rises, the tundra melts. What happens? That methane is released into the atmosphere. Now think about that for a second. Methane, 24 times a more powerful global greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide, is being released and will be released in greater amounts as time passes. This is called a feedback loop. Now, a feedback loop happens, in this case, and the tundra is a great example, as the temperatures rise on the planet. As the temperature increases, methane, the tundra melts, methane is released. Methane is released and makes the warming of the planet accelerate, which means more tundra will melt, which means more methane will be released. This is a feedback loop that will continue and accelerate, exacerbating climate change. Now, we don't know fully how bad this is going to get, but we know that this is a very, very severe problem that is going to get worse as time passes. Another feedback loop, of course, is as the temperature goes up, the oceans become more acidified. As the oceans become more acidified, their ability to absorb carbon dioxide as a carbon sink actually diminishes. So warming oceans, more acidified ocean, the ability of the ocean to absorb carbon dioxide goes down, which means the temperature goes up, which means a more acidified ocean, again, a bad feedback loop for the oceans. So as we see that the ecosystems of the planet, the life support systems of our planet, are not getting worse in a linear way, they're getting worse in a geometric fashion. On your left, you see the Aral Sea. The Aral Sea was once a massive sea in Eurasia. On the furthest left, you see what it was in 1977. It was a very large freshwater body. You can see in 2010 what it is like today. It has shrunk, with huge implications for the people who live in the region, because of the things that we absolutely can't live without, and of course we know fresh water is one of them. But it's not only the fresh water, but also the creatures, the fish that live in the Aral Sea are an important source of food and protein and employment for the people who live in that region. The Aral Sea is dying. It is shrinking as a result, in part, of overuse as well as climate change. Other threats. One of the biggest killers we have, top left corner, are the mosquitoes and other insects that are vector-borne diseases. As temperatures change, as weather patterns change, we know that the pattern of these vector-borne diseases is changing. You see what's happening with malaria in parts of the world. That's changing. And we also saw the crisis of the Zika virus in Latin America. Zika virus is moving and changing, and other diseases are moving and changing with those vectors as temperatures change. So climate change has a significant impact upon the pattern and distribution and incidence of vector-borne diseases. Now, when we were in California, I was thankful that an issue that's been neglected for a long time rose its head, and that is the issue of pollution. In the top right-hand corner, you see Delhi. Delhi, India is one of, if not the most polluted large cities in the world. Pollution kills a staggering 9 million people every year. I mean, that's more than HIV, malaria, and tuberculosis combined by far. Of that 9 million people who die, 7 million die from air pollution alone. And this is a direct consequence of our actions. So pollution, generally 9 million people a year, and air pollution, 7 million people a year, is preventable. It's directly the cause of our actions. And for too long, we have been neglecting this global challenge. On the bottom left, you see a very interesting picture. It's split. The furthest left one, you see a coral reef. That's a healthy coral reef. On your right, you see bleached coral reef. Now, coral reefs are very, very important because they are a major source of where fish reproduce. Billions of people around the planet rely on fish for livelihoods as well as a source of protein. And as time passes, as our Earth is warming, as I mentioned before, so too are our oceans. As the oceans warm and acidify, the coral is bleaching, and when the coral bleaches, the amount of fish that live in the sea are also in steep decline. So the acidification of the ocean, the bleaching of coral, a direct result of human action, in particular climate change. On the lower right, you see a black rhino. Now, why did I put a black rhino on this picture? Well, one of the things that are neglected is the fact that we're living in the 6th global extinction. Right now, we're seeing a massive loss of biodiversity. One of the worst losses of biodiversity our planet has ever seen. Now, why is this important to us? Well, we're part of an intricate web of life. And whether you're talking about bee pollinators or other creatures, we rely on each other to be able to maintain this web of life that's vital to our existence. Now, that particular rhino, its population, black rhino, declined by 98% over the last century, mostly because they've been shot for the horns on the top of their head because people consume them, particularly in Vietnam and in South Asia, for products that they deem to be protect them from having hangovers, believe it or not. And which is completely false because the horn is simply keratin, the kind of stuff that your hair and your nails are made out of. Now, I use this as an example just to show that in a very short period of time, we're seeing the massive loss of biodiversity around the world, and this massive loss of biodiversity is important. It's important also for people living in developing countries because the reserves and parks that they represent are a major source of revenue for them, for jobs. It's also culturally important for them. And so as the biodiversity loss is taking place, it's affecting everybody in a vast number of ways. So the loss of biodiversity is affecting food, it's affecting jobs, it's affecting the social determinants of health. And it's completely, again, a result of our actions. So it's not all bad news. There's good news, and we do have solutions to address these challenges. One of the biggest challenges we have is really to aggregate the solutions we know work and to share them and to mobilize and implement what we know today. I think one of the enormous opportunities we have is to take that body of research that's taking place, that incredible body of knowledge that is published in journals, but we need to be able to translate that knowledge in a way that's usable and it's a way that's understandable to not only policymakers but the public. So while policies are vitally important and we need to be becoming more politically active to change those policies, it's important to remember that at the end of the day, each of us, all of us, can have an impact upon the environmental challenges of our time. Recycling, reducing consumption are all within our purview. The other thing is in terms of on the development side, we neglect an important opportunity, and that is to integrate ecosystem services protection into development efforts. Imagine this, if we're able to go and integrate conservation into development, what happens? We're able to go and produce ecosystem services that affect people's food, water, thatch for homes, jobs, and can be a sustainable source of revenue that can be invested into healthcare, education, and other social determinants of health. As I mentioned, climate change. Well, there are a raft of solutions that can be done, and one of I think what was very encouraging in San Francisco this week is that what was brought up again and again is that we are right now still oddly providing enormous subsidies to the fossil fuel sector. Now, this is completely absurd given the urgency and threat that climate change poses. So here's something we can do. Rapidly scale down and eliminate the subsidies for fossil fuel, but translate those subsidies into green, sustainable economic development. People need jobs, so we need to be able to use those resources to be able to transition our economy from one that is economies that are based on, in part, fossil fuels, but transfer that and invest in economies and investments that can be able to enable us to live in a sustainable way on our planet. Pollution control, the built environment. We know that as our population increases, the next 2 billion people, where are they going to go? Well, they're not going to see a big increase in rural areas. What we are going to see is a big increase in urban settings. So one of the challenges we have is being able to live in healthier cities, the built environment. There are a lot of things we can do, from changing building codes to how we build our roads to investments in public transportation. There's much we can do that we know today on how we can live in sustainable, healthier cities. And this is going to be vitally important not only for today, because we're mostly an urban creature, urban species, but in the future that's going to be even a larger challenge. Changing industrial practices from agriculture to the extractive industries. There are many solutions. We have to work with the private sector to be able to implement this and create incentives for the private sector to be able to shift from practices that are damaging our planet to practices that are going to enable us to live in a healthy planet. Now, one thing I noticed in the meeting in San Francisco that was I frankly neglected was in the area of protecting carbon sinks. Now, there's carbon sinks that are terrestrial or land-based, but also there are carbon sinks that are in marshes and in wetlands. Wetlands and marshes are a much more powerful carbon sink, incidentally, than forests. But what we're doing and have been doing for a long time is we have been wiping out those areas. In terms of the two lungs of the planet, the Congo Basin as well as Amazonia, those are being destroyed. We were seeing some success in Amazon for a while, but unfortunately there's been a retrenchment and a move towards massively deforesting the Amazon Basin. This is not only an issue that's going to affect that region, but it's a global issue, as both the Amazon Basin and the Congo River Basin are the two lungs of the planet. So we need to work collectively with countries around the world to be able to protect green space, and in particular protect those wetlands, because they're a vital and natural source of carbon sinks to draw carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. Freshwater protection and use. We have been neglecting our freshwater use for a long time. So in many parts of the world, we're seeing an increasing movement towards water crises. We saw that this year in Cape Town, which was going to be the first major city in the world that nearly ran out of fresh water. This is only the tip of the iceberg. As time passes, more and more cities are going to have a larger problem with being able to access fresh water, not only because we're actually depleting the aquifers on the planet, but also because of climate change is causing extreme weather events, including drought. Also, we need to look at dealing with unmet family planning needs. There are over 220 million women around the world who want to be able to have access to family planning, and we know that one of the most powerful things we can do is also to reduce the population growth rate on the planet. So there are 220 million women around the world who want to access family planning. We need to work collectively to be able to enable them to exercise their right to control the number of children they have. Now, environmental protection and non-communicable diseases. Non-communicable diseases, so cardiovascular disease, pulmonary disease disorders, diabetes, cancer, and injury represent 41 million deaths a year. That's approximately 71% of all deaths per year, and a good chunk of those happen between the ages of 30 and 69, what we call premature deaths. The interesting thing about non-communicable diseases are, number one, it's a result in part because of our inactive lifestyles, poor diets, the overconsumption of alcohol and other drugs. And what we know is that the non-communicable diseases is not a collection of diseases that affect just rich nations. Poorer nations are not only affected deeply, but it also hits them harder. So younger people are being affected by non-communicable diseases, and it's more severe in low-income countries than in high-income countries. But this is a global challenge. So what can we do about it? And why did I bring up environmental protection and global health in this? The interesting thing is that green spaces are very important sources of land mass and land use that can be important in reducing NCDs. If you increase your physical activity in wild spaces, in open areas, in green space, you can have a profound impact upon your risk for heart disease, lung disease, diabetes, and cancer. Also, it can affect one of the neglected areas in non-communicable diseases, and that is mental health, and in particular, depression and anxiety. While they don't kill a lot of people, relatively speaking, they are the leading cause of disability in the world. And the interesting thing about having access to and going out and spending time in nature is that it can have a profound impact on reducing depression, the leading cause of disability in the world. So in short, I'd like to invite you all to the Consortium of Universities for Global Health, our annual conference, because that conference is taking place next year, March 7th to 10th in Chicago, and we're going to talk about translation and implementation for impact in global health. Now, CUGH is the world's largest consortium of universities involved in improving the health of people on the planet. So it's dealing with global health, it's dealing with, obviously, the health of the planet, planetary health, it's dealing with One Health, that intersection of animals and humans that we are addressing. And it's also important, and will deal with the environmental challenges broadly that we are facing. So please consider coming to our conference in Chicago on March the 7th. We will have our satellite days. Most of those satellite days are perfectly free to attend, and then the main conference is the 8th to the 10th, where many of the issues we'll be dealing with that we've spoken about today, from climate change to One Health to building healthy cities, will be addressed at our conference next March. And I should tell you that Edinburgh University is a valued member of CUGH, and Dr. Grant happens to co-chair CUGH's research committee. So I'll close with a challenge. We all know, friends, that this is our home. Earth is our home. There is no planet B. It's this or nothing. We're not going to live on Mars, regardless of whether we go and explore it. And right now, our Earth is in crisis. It's in crisis from climate change, environmental degradation, and other threats. As I mentioned, the good news is that we can deal with this challenge, and we can work together to do it. So we need to act, and act now. We need to get politically active. We need to tell policymakers, and as a former member of parliament, I can tell you that you have to give policymakers things they can do. They're going to ask you, what do you want me to do? Why do you want me to do it? And importantly, what's the rate of return on the investment? Let's give that to them. Lastly, all of us can play a role in reducing the impact we're having on our planet. Small, modest changes by the many equals a big change overall. So let's work together and do this. Let's build a healthy, happier planet for all, and we look forward to joining you in the future in our common effort. Thanks for joining us today on our webinar, Healthy Planet, Healthy People. I'm Keith Martin.